give you a quick bit of overview about what we do. Some of you here might well already be Oriental Bird Club members and you receive our bulletin and our journal. But the OBC, we are a non-profit based in the United Kingdom. And we work very closely with a network of conservationists, bird watchers, and ornithologists in Southeast Asia. And not just to promote bird watching, but also to promote professional study of birds in Asia, as well as conservation activities focused on all the threatened species we have here in Asia. We have been running for well over 30 years, and we are entirely volunteer-led. So myself and my colleagues, some of who are also on this call, we work on and support the Oriental Bird Club during our free time on our weekends. The OBC is also very much a conservation NGO, like other NGOs working in the region, and we try our best to mobilize resources to support conservation activities in this region. Every year we bring in funds from our donors to support conservation projects happening anywhere from between Pakistan to Indonesia, and we fund an average of 20 projects a year, supporting work focused on the conservation of species like shorebirds, some of the most pressing conservation issues we have here in Southeast Asia, for example, the songbird trait. Many of you may have heard about the work on the songbird trait, as well as migratory species, which is another group of birds that are highly threatened here in Asia. And of course, the OBC promotes ornithology, the professional study of birds. We have two publications, Birding Asia. Some of you who have seen Birding Asia is a very popular means to disseminate news on birds and bird conservation here in Asia. And a journal, a peer-reviewed journal called the Journal of Asian Ornithology, which we publish one copy a year, featuring research focused on Asian species. So that hopefully gives you a little bit of an overview of what we do at the Oriental Bird Club, and that should bring me into today's webinar proper. So like I mentioned earlier on, we will have three speakers. Two of my colleagues here, Dr. Chloe Hatton and Dr. Anuj Jain. Anuj also will be moderating this webinar. Will be giving us a little bit of background and overview on the conservation of the helmeted hornbill, a critically endangered species according to the IUCN Red List. Those of you who are bird watchers in Southeast Asia, for example, in Malaysia and Indonesia, you may well have been fortunate enough to see this really special bird in the wild in the tropical rainforests of the peninsula, Borneo, and Sumatra. But I will let the experts do the talking. And on that very note, I will first pass the floor to Anuj, who will give us a little bit of an overview of the work that he does for BirdLife International, his work on the conservation of the helmeted hornbill. Anuj, many of us know, is a very passionate conservationist. He has broad interests from everything from urban biodiversity to the conservation of some of Southeast Asia's most threatened species. I will let Anuj speak more about his work, and on that very note, I will pass the floor to Anuj. Over to you.
Thank you, Ding Li. If you could let me share screen, please. Are you able to see my screen? Okay, thank you for that introduction, Ding Li. So today my job is really just to set the stage, give a global regional perspective of where we are with the helmeted hornbills. I represent two organizations, BirdLife International, of course, where I manage the Preventing Extinctions program, focusing on bird trade, but also the Helmeted Hornbill Working Group, which I co-coordinate with Jessica Lee of Mandai Nature. Okay, but before we get into helmeted hornbills proper, as Ding Li said, there are many pertinent issues that impact species in Asia, many of which are threatened by songbird trade, hunted for food, delicacy, recreation, as well as for the cage bird trade, as you see for songbirds as well as parrots. Numbers really vary. This is an analysis we did some years ago where we picked up more than 60% of threatened birds in Asia. Take a note, threatened, already threatened, right? So more than 60% are threatened by or impacted by hunting and trade. And the number, I think, over the years keeps increasing and increasing. Okay, so from that, the helmeted hornbill caste crisis emerged Many of you know that in detail, but before we get into it proper, I think let's get intimate with the birds. Okay. Many of us have seen this magnificent sight that Dingli talked about across the rainforests of Southeast Asia, from Myanmar, Thailand, Borneo, spanning Indonesia, Malaysia, as well as Brunei. These large charismatic birds are more than a meter tall. The tail feathers themselves are more than a meter tall. They span the deep rainforests, pristine rainforests of Southeast Asia. And I think we can really understand them perhaps best by this cartoon illustrated by our friend Mohan Chakravarti for the Helmeted Hornbill Working Group and the Hornbill Specialist Group. So this bird, which is quite dinosaur looking, in my opinion, has a funky head or spiky hairstyle, and it has a helmet, right, which weighs quite. It's the only bird in among the hornbills that has a solid casque, and despite that, this helmet is not enough to protect it. Many of us have seen these aerial headbutting contests of this bird. Birds fly at great speed, collide, and the sound of these collisions sometimes can run through several hundreds of meters. Quite a fantastic sight. Sometimes they compete for territory or access for fruiting trees, others. And these birds are also popular in folklore, such as in the Dayak folklore, because of their sound that has an X sound in the call, as well as during the end, the cracking of human laughter. These birds, like other hornbills, are slow breeders, produce one chick every season. And like other hornbills, the dad is, the supreme caretaker of the bird, as well as the mummy when they are nesting in the nesting cavity, because the mummy seals herself up. And this is a big problem, because if the dads are hunted or poached out, the family really starves, in the mummy as well as the chicks. So really, as illustrated by this cartoon, can you not wear a helmet when you go to work? Even a helmet is not safe to protect these birds. But that's not all. As we know, the habitat loss, logging, and other threats are also equally important in the destroying habitat for this species. So on a more serious note, this crisis came by several years ago. The casques are in great demand as a material for carved jewelry, and carved or uncarved, they fetch a high price in the market. And we now know that organized crime networks are involved, sometimes in large numbers, where they really empty out the forests in Southeast Asia. This is an old crisis, but also new. Helmeted hornbills have been in demand for centuries as an elite product, where they were demanded by the Chinese emperors, and there was an established supply chain coming in from Borneo in particular through trade routes. But in the past 10 years, the demand has really grown, and many of us attribute it to the growing middle class around the world. But the whistle was blown by no other than Yokyok Hadi Prakarsa of Rangkong, Indonesia, who witnessed firsthand the poaching that was happening in Kalimantan. People like Nigel Collins and others also published this, again in Birding Asia. So this bird has had historic connections with OBC. And in response, an emergency meeting was held in 2015. People like Bichu Strang was very important in this endeavor. And they put together this meeting in 2015 that led to discussions. Ultimately, the bird was uplisted from near threatened to critically endangered. It is on CITES Appendix 1. So no trade is allowed in this species. And at that point, an informal working group was established to really start talking about this emergency crisis. Fast forward 2 years, 2017, Just after the International Hornbill Conference in Sarawak, a meeting was put together, which was attended by more than 30 experts across the range, transit, and demand countries, which brought together again renowned Hornbill researchers and experts such as Dr. Pillai Punswad, Vijak Chimchom, others, as well as colleagues from Africa. And we all talked about this. Here on the screen, you see different organizations that participated. And eventually we developed the plan, the strategy to conserve the bird across Southeast Asia. That also led to formalization of the working group, because till then there was none. In fact, the Hornbill Specialist Group had been quiet for a while, so it was also resurrected right after the meeting, and different working teams for the species were also identified. So this document was put out a couple of months after the meeting and adopted by the IUCN. This has been the guiding document that guides the working group and its collaborators and friends. So the document identifies a long-term vision for the bird, which is to really see thriving populations that are ecologically functional in both intact and managed forests across its range. And equally, these birds are cherished by society, by local and global communities, protected from threats such as poaching, trade, and habitat loss. We understand that this will only be possible through international collaboration, given the cross-border nature of the trade that threatens the species. In response, we identified 3 different goals. First, to eliminate trade in helmeted hornbills, their parts and derivatives, and you'll see some photos later. To strictly protect the populations throughout the range and to maintain viable populations. And where these populations have been lost, try our very best to recover. The group is structured or operationalized through 4 different subgroups: trade, research, habitat, and capacity development. This is an old slide, and I'll say more about the 5th subgroup that has emerged in a bit. But these were the original 4, and each of them have leads, co-leads that talk to the different countries, the range countries, but also the consumer and transit countries, territories, states. And in between are the coordinators who are trying to make sure this international collaboration is facilitated. So we've had several meetings to really talk about where to identify the work, our priority areas, where our work should be focused. So this starts with the vast rainforests of Southeast Asia. We know some locations where the birds are, but not all. And if we don't even know where they are, how are we going to protect them? Then we can't protect everything. So there needs to be some prioritization. So we've identified hotspots. We've gotten together to really understand where the knowledge gaps at different scales, from regional cluster to site scale. What are the protocols? Let's discuss them, agree on them. Different people do transacts, point counts differently. And we put together a guiding document that has been circulated with the working group, that has also embarked on a series of rapid assessments that I personally have been involved in through BirdLife and their partners, but also many other stakeholders and groups in the working group. To give a bit of a flavor of this, we've identified population hotspots. If they're large enough, they have large population density of the species. There's evidence of breeding, and there is hope that threats can be mitigated with proper infrastructure, smart patrols, or enough interest either from the government or enough people interested through NGOs, communities, etc. And we've published some of this work again through OBC in Birding Asia, talking about some of our ideas. Many rapid assessments have been launched. Here is just a snapshot that BirdLife and partners were involved in across the range, funded by many different organizations, from NatGeo to Foundation Segre, March Conservation Fund, and others across the entire range. And really, we've been trying to identify safe havens. places where the birds can stay safe uh, without poaching pressure. But when poaching pressure has been identified, how can we rapidly deploy reinforcement? And that means build capacity for effective monitoring, enforcement to integrate helmeted hornbill in smart patrols, and develop all the infrastructure, informants on the ground as well, such that if communities see any evidence of poaching, they inform and we are activated. The backbone of it has been a lot of trainings, field surveys, talking to communities, doing interviews, as well as empowering communities. And here I want to point out the work done by Yap from Malaysian Nature Society in Belum Temangor, where he's been working for over 15 years in Royal Belum and the Belum Temangor Forest Complex. That's exemplary. And an equal work has been done in the Thai national parks in Sungai Padi and Budo National Parks by Pillai Punspad and team. And they have really set the stage about protecting these communities, getting involved towards Hornbill Guardian programs. But while we are doing that, really working along at the source area, we are also vigilant. And here, the NGO Traffic is really a superstar. They have been monitoring the trade across online as well as the physical platforms, where we continue to see these products. Even in the online markets where helmeted hornbills are very popular. So in response, Traffic has developed many different manuals. Here you see one for commonly identified wildlife, especially in the Golden Triangle, where in the past, this species used to be popular with Chinese tourists coming in. So how can the enforcement teams identify the birds? How can they distinguish them from other hornbills, many of which are also threatened for cask, sometimes for pets, etc., etc. But over the time, as we've been doing these activities, we realized that reducing demand is key. It was not as clearly identified in the original workshop, but over the years has been very clear. The trade flows are also evident. Majority of birds come from Indonesia and enter China from Hong Kong, Shenzhen, ports, and eventually out into China, where they are carved. So many of us have been talking about this, and a two-day workshop really brought together the right stakeholders, led by Jack Lam as well as Chloe Hatton, who have been instrumental in the demand reduction subgroup. And this group is very, very focused on profiling who is buying, because we don't even understand that fully. What age group, what profile, how are they buying, why are they buying at the first place, and then really to understand the carving industry, the scale, and how can we really infiltrate it, if you will, and make a difference. Okay, yeah, more than 3,000 cars, skulls, or products have been seized, so we've had our eye out. So coming close to the end, as we've now been looking at the demand reduction aspect, we've also been mindful that things have changed since the pandemic. This is international trade, and some of it was put on hold during the pandemic. But we heard stockpiles were piling up within Indonesia and other places because hunting continued, and while the smugglers and traders, middlemen couldn't ship the birds outside, they had these stockpiles, and we saw some of it being pushed out right after the pandemic. During the pandemic, we also heard new emerging markets. Previously, as I said, demand was in China predominantly, but we also saw new carvers emerge within Indonesia, and they were publicizing locally manufactured and locally produced hornbill products. So that was worrying. Traffic and others have been investigating that. We don't quite know yet if The demand has reduced overall. Some trends suggest yes, they have, but others suggest the trade has really gone black market. And with new demand, new markets, there is increasing concern. I will end there and I will pass it on to Chloe, who has really been working on the demand side and investigating where do we go from here. Over to you, Chloe. Thank you. Chloe, I think you're still muted.
Okay, cool. All good?
All
Can you
good.
see that? All good? Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Thanks, Anush, for that really good introduction. Yeah, so basically, yeah, as Anush said, so I am a postdoc in the City University of Hong Kong, so I live in Hong Kong. So we get dead hornbills here, unfortunately. We don't get live hornbills like everyone else. So we decided that we needed to do something about that. And over in Hong Kong, we received some funding from the Oriental Bird Club, which helped us to develop an education kit for enforcement and courts here to teach them a bit more about the helmeted hornbill. So as Anuja said, the helmeted hornbill lives across Southeast Asia and it is traded illegally. And so it is regulated on CITES Appendix 1, which means no commercial trade is allowed. And it is critically endangered, as we know. And people trade and poach this bird for its head. So the casque is actually everything beyond the skull, so including the dense yellow part there, which is bone, and then right at the end, the thick red part is keratin, and that's the part that people trade and carve. So traditionally, as Anuja's mentioned, it's carved into ornaments that were maybe for tribal dress in places like Borneo, and then also traded into China during the dynasty eras. But more modern trade has been occurring, and we can see some collectibles, these games people call one, and people buying for antiques and for different artwork as well popping up. And we found over 1,000 products auctioned online in Indonesia and in China as well between 1992 and 2021. And we've also seen some for sale in physical markets, like this one over on the right, this bracelet down at the bottom. It was found in Macau back in 2018. And where I am here in Hong Kong, along the border between Hong Kong and China in particular, it's a hotspot for seizures. So there have been 2,917 seizures, and over in Indonesia, there's 2,600 seizures. So Indonesia is where a lot of the birds are coming from. And clearly, as Anuja's map also showed us, Hong Kong and China is where all the birds are going. So it seems pretty straightforward in terms of what the trade route is from what the data says anyway. And just an update there from Anuja's, between 2006 and 2021, we've seen over 6,000 helmeted hornbill products and parts seized. So yeah, it's pretty big. So we developed a project in Hong Kong to try and pull together some resources and materials for the Hong Kong government and judiciary in order to educate them and to help with all the seizures we were getting over here. So we provided them with information on the species and its threats, and then also forensic tools that could be used in cases, and a species victim impact statement, which is a document that can be used to train judiciary in handling cases in court of helmeted hornbills. So first of all, we wanted to develop some material on the helmeted hornbill. As we said, it's not native to Hong Kong, so just so that the government and the public as well involved can see the ecological and cultural value of the species. And we created a documentary for the Hong Kong government, and we showcased the species here and its trade in Hong Kong and China, and the seriousness of wildlife crime in Hong Kong and the importance of forensics tests that can be used to help cases, and also some of the work across the region through all the different collaborators involved in the Helmeted Hornbill Working Group. And hopefully we'll be able to show you the documentary later. So it's only about a 5-minute documentary, it's quite short. We also created an educational poster, which we presented to the Agricultural, Fishery and Conservation Department of the Hong Kong government, so AFCD. They're in charge of endangered species and CITES. And they have an education centre where school kids can go during the weekdays. And we wanted to present something that was applicable for children and the public in general, that would be able to highlight how beautiful the bird was and how fascinating it was, and highlighted some of the interesting parts of it, not necessarily focusing on its rarity or how expensive it is. And we didn't use things like terms like red ivory, because that associates with elephant ivory, which everybody here knows about, and we don't really want to do that, just in case that increases demand if demand is not here yet. And then we also presented the government with some forensic tools that we've developed for the helmeted hornbill. So forensics, wildlife forensics is basically the application of science to wildlife crimes, criminal cases. And a lot of the time, the questions and the methods will be related to the law. So for this in particular in Hong Kong is CITES. And so we need to prove whether the law has been violated or not. Is this species a CITES species? So we can look at what species is it. We can also look at where did it come from, because that might be interesting for investigation across borders, and also what individual is it from. So these are 3 typical questions in wildlife forensics. And then those scientific methods can be validated for courts so that they can stand up in court. So we looked at some studies and showed them studies that had been done. First one on the left is a paper that was conducted by Thailand's Department of National Parks, DNP, which helped develop some short DNA primers that targeted a small version of the mitochondrial DNA, which could identify the species from the casks. And for my PhD, alongside collaborators in Brin in Indonesia, we helped to validate this study for forensic use in court. So we tested the repeatability of the study, the reproducibility, how sensitive it was, and specific. So basically we could use this test across different countries, across different labs by different people. So that is to identify whether a species that is seized in a country of unknown origin, to see what species it is. But we realized that we could also use the same part of the genome, it was the cytochrome B region, to get a low resolution still, but some split of geographic origin. So our primers were able to distinguish between georeferenced birds from Borneo and from Sumatra and Thailand. So it's still quite a low resolution split, but we're currently working on whole genome data so that we can get high resolution. So that means when we get a cask in Hong Kong, we can say, this is a helmeted hornbill because we know through the species ID test. And we can also say, this is from this region. And so we can get in contact with the forensics labs or the government over in that country and collaborate along the trade route. And this particular study has not validated yet, so it's not ready for court use and it's still under production. So then finally, we developed something called a species victim impact statement, which was used, it was prepared for the government and the judiciary here in Hong Kong. Basically, a human victim of a crime can make a victim impact statement, which alerts the court to the harm that they've suffered. But an animal cannot do that, or a plant cannot do that. So in the absence of training in ecology and conservation, the judiciary needs some help, basically. So we, along with the Faculty of Law and the School of Biological Sciences at the University of Hong Kong developed these documents for different species that we can train the government with. And you can go to this website and scan the QR code. You can find a bunch of different species that have species victim impact statements, or SVISs. And you can also get in contact with the people in the Faculty of Law for collaborations across jurisdictions and for different species that might need SVIS being created. So this is what it looks like. It's a document that talks about specimen description, scientific name, quantity, trade value estimates, a side appendix, etc. And I think it even goes into like disease and pathogen concerns as well for certain species. Not all of them will have exactly the same information. So we then train the DA, the Department of Justice, and we help them to understand this and how it can impact their cases. And we haven't had a helmeted hornbill case yet in Hong Kong, but hopefully moving forward, that will help help determine the impact and the sentencing. So that was really cool. And myself and my previous supervisor, Caroline Dingle, can also be called as forensic expert witnesses if there's a species ID case in Hong Kong. So we presented all of this information to AFCD, the Agricultural Fishery Conservation Department at Hong Kong government, and we received feedback that their understanding of the helmeted hornbill and the importance of its trade and of it in general and the trade has increased, and their ability to recognize the products has either remained the same or increased, and their knowledge of forensics methods has also either remained the same or increased. So that's positive. Yeah, so in summary, we just wanted to say, yeah, basically the project that was funded by OBC really helped us to provide some educational outreach materials to show how great the birds were, but also how they're hunted and traded illegally, to show that there are forensic tests and describe them in scientific detail to people that need to know, and also have a victim impact statement that was delivered to courts, and people in the judiciary were trained for that. So yeah, that's all good news. So we'll watch this space. Like I said, we haven't had a case yet. But we also wanted to share this information. So you can also scan the QR codes here, and we can make them available later. But included in the Google folder or on this website, which a password is next to it, they're both the same information. It's the documentary, the poster, and the SVIS, and you can use them for your public and government and judicial outreach. So with that, I just want to say thank you to all the collaborators. Thank you to Oriental Bird Club for funding all of this. Yeah, it's a really great project and so many people were involved. It was a true international collaboration. Yeah, so thank you very much. And I will hand over to Jacqueline now.
Thanks. That was a good summary. Thanks, Chloe. We have a little documentary video. I think that can possibly come towards the end of I think we have a little bit of time towards the end of the webinar. So let's keep our fingers crossed. I'm sure we'll have time for that. Yeah. Thanks for the excellent overview. I'm just gonna jump back just to summarize a couple of points from the excellent presentation that Chloe and Anuj has given. And that do a little bit of recap before we move on into the next part of our webinar. I think Anuj has already given us a very good introduction to the helmeted hornbill, why it's a species that matter, and also shared a little bit about his own experiences with the species, one of the most spectacular wild birds here in Southeast Asia. Some of us have seen it, many of us may not have seen it, and hopefully this trigger your interest to want to visit places in the region to see it. I think Chloe and Anuj has given us also an excellent summary of the threats the species is facing, a bunch of threats from habitat loss to, more importantly, as Chloe has pointed out in your presentation, the wildlife trade. And the helmeted hornbill is obviously one of those species, really prominent species that are severely impacted by the trade of its skulls, its casks, which has been ongoing in Asia for centuries and may take a turn for the worse if we don't do anything about it. So thanks for that really interesting and important overview. And also, I think a last final point I wanted to mention is the power of conservation forensics that Chloe has excellently given us, telling us that conservation is not just about us shouting at the government and other stakeholders, but that we also need to do a little bit of science and investigation, putting that multidisciplinary approach to helping to address conservation issues. And I hope with this, we are now set for the next presentation by Jacqueline Weir. I'm not sure if I've given that comprehensive an introduction to Jacqueline's work, but maybe before we go into your presentation, I just wanted to say a couple of words about your work. Jacqueline, thanks for making time to join us tonight. It's still a bit early in the day in your part of the world, but for those of us who don't know Jacqueline, she is an ecologist at the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds, the biggest NGO in the UK and possibly in the old world, I think. She works on the conservation of a very important ecosystem in the UK, meadows and woodlands. And I'm sure for those of you out there who are involved in woodland conservation at some point, you will see and read about her work. But more importantly, Jacqueline is also a colleague to me here at the Oriental Bird Club. She is the China Conservation Officer. So we work very closely with Jacqueline to try to bring in support for projects in China and also other parts of Asia. So I think I will leave Jacqueline to introduce a little bit more about work in a bit. But I think the really exciting thing for us is that Jacqueline and her colleague Lillian Fu has worked on a really interesting book, a children's book on the helmeted hornbill, and another really charismatic mammal we have here in Southeast Asia, the Sunda pangolin, which is again one of the most heavily traded species, a species that is listed as critically endangered. And on that very note, I will pass the floor to Jacqueline to take us through her adventure coming up with this book, possibly the first of its kind that brings together into one book for a broad audience the conservation of two of Southeast Asia's most threatened species, the helmeted hornbill and the Sunda pangolin. Over to you, Jacqueline.
Thank you for the very kind introduction. Hopefully I can share my screen. Can you see that?
All good.
Okay. Excuse me. I hope my voice holds out. Yeah, so I'm Jacqueline Weir. As Dingley has just told us, I work for the RSPB in my day job. I've recently taken on there the role of species lead for helmeted hornbill, as well as my work in the UK. And in my spare time, as Dingley mentioned, OBC is all done sort of voluntarily in people's spare time. So in my spare time, I work for OBC, volunteer for OBC as China Conservation Officer. But the project I want to tell you about started very much as a personal project. Inspired through my role in OBC, I really wanted to do a bit extra to help helmeted hornbills. So I wrote a children's storybook. And that became a collaboration with Hong Kong Birdwatching Society, who have now published the book. Excuse me. Before I talk a bit more about the book, I'd like to refer you back to the Helmeted Hornbill Working Group Action Plan and Conservation Strategy, which Anuj was talking to us about. So there is a motion within that to raise awareness of helmeted hornbills through increased communications, publicity, education, public engagement and demand reduction campaigns within remaining parts of the native range of the species and with end users. So hopefully the book will help with that by increasing communications. We have some educational activities planned within Hong Kong where the book's been published. And there's demand reduction messaging within the book, which is Hong Kong being quite a key port, as Chloe was telling us, for the illegal trade of helmeted hornbill parts, and some end-use demand within Hong Kong. So hopefully the book will help to have some demand reduction effect within Hong Kong. The book is called The Tallest Tree, A Rainforest Adventure. It's written by myself and brilliantly illustrated by Lillian Fu. It's been published in Hong Kong by the Hong Kong Birdwatching Society, who are also a BirdLife International partner. So the main characters in the book are a helmeted hornbill, whose name is Bill, and a sunder pangolin. Both of these are critically endangered species, threatened very much by the illegal wildlife trade, as we've heard. For pangolins, it's very much for their scales, for traditional medicine, but also partly for their meat. So the two creatures are the main characters in the book. But the tree itself is also something of a focus, and that's why I wanted to call the book, The Tallest Tree. So helmeted hornbills tend to nest in the biggest, tallest, often dipterocarp rainforest trees. And they're the kind of trees that are particularly threatened by illegal logging and other issues, deforestation, habitat loss. So it's reflecting that in the book title. The idea was very much inspired through my role in OBC, hearing more about the plight of helmeted hornbills, and we funded some of the work that Chloe's been telling us about. So I really wanted to do more. And I've always been very inspired by beautifully illustrated books, especially some that I remember from my own childhood. So I really wanted to do something kind of creative around that, to increase children's appreciation of the rainforest and some of these special creatures that are quite unusual in the case of pangolins and helmeted hornbills, quite sort of special charismatic species, but which are quite little known among a lot of people. So I really wanted to sort of increase engagement with these unusual species and hopefully have some effect on demand reduction, like I say. All the illustrations on these slides are from the book. And the book is also true to the ecology of the two species. So as Anuj was telling us earlier, helmeted hornbills nest in tree holes, which the female barricades up with mud and feces and other things. And then the male will come and feed, provision the female and the chick within the nest hole. And the male will fly for a long range across the rainforest. And the character Bill in the story will fly long distances so he can see what's going on in the forest. And he's quite a sort of wise and knowledgeable bird. So that's reflected in the illustrations as well. This is Bill coming back to the nest hole to feed the female and the chick. And also it talks about the diet of the hornbills. So he goes away to gather figs and fruit and some small animals like lizards and things and bring them back to the nest hole. And the book also talks about the laughing call of the helmeted hornbill. So Bill laughs quite a lot in the book, and that really reflects the unique call that the helmeted hornbills have as well. Sunder pangolins are quite largely arboreal. They nest in burrows in the ground, they dig burrows and they eat ants. But they're also quite arboreal and spend quite a lot of time in the trees. And they have this prehensile tail, which they can wrap around branches and they're known to hang from the tail, like in the picture. They're nocturnal creatures, but they will come out in early morning and evening. So the story takes place in the evening. And I really wanted to talk to you a bit more about the illustrations in the book, because I think Lillian did this in such an inventive way. This is a storyboard for the book when we were planning how it would go and what illustrations would be in the book and planning out the story. This is early stages of creating the book. And there's also a page you can see there with information about species themselves. So that is in the final version of the book as well. So with the illustrations, we really wanted to convey the beauty of the rainforest and these special creatures, and to have warm characters that children could relate to. But Lillian really wanted to reflect the range of the species as well. And so she looked at this Southeast Asian style paper cut technique and reflecting kind of Southeast Asian shadow puppet styles, which she's done very layered illustrations, which was done like this. So it's a very labor-intensive way of doing the illustrations. Lillian actually drew and then cut out pictures of the creatures and the characters and the background, and then laid them on sheets of glass, one on top of the other. And then a light can be shone through from underneath to provide correct kind of lighting, and a photograph taken from the top. So in the illustrations, I think particularly in this one, you can see the layering. So the pangolin character is quite towards the front of the picture. Some of the leaves and the plants are in front of that. And you can see the trees and things fading away into the background. So I think she's achieved a very sort of unique and special effect with the illustrations there. So I just want to take you through the story. I'm not going to read the whole story, but to take you through sort of the general idea, what happens, and show you some more illustrations from the book. So the two characters, Bill the Hornbill and Trixie the Pangolin, they meet in the tree. Like I say, the pangolins, thunder pangolins are quite arboreal. So the pangolin character lives in among a hole in the roots of the tallest tree, but she climbs up and she meets the Hornbill character on a branch, and the two creatures become friends. But one day, the pangolin is poached from within her comfortable tree hole, grabbed by humans and thrown into a truck. The humans also fire some gunshots at the Hornbill, Bill, but he manages to escape and he follows the truck. So there's kind of a chase through the forest, and he follows in hope of rescuing his friend. So the book very much addresses the poaching issue for both species. Forest rangers become involved. They hear the gunshots and they follow the poacher's truck, and they try to apprehend the poachers. But the poachers try to drive away, and Bill becomes the hero, flaps down and lands on the windscreen of the truck. So the poachers are then apprehended by the forest rangers. There's then a conversation between the two characters. The pangolin asks, "Why did those people catch me?" And the Hornbill character says, "Well, some people buy things made from your scales and my horn. So some people like to buy things made from our body parts, essentially." And there's demand reduction messaging here, because he says more and more people are against buying these things made from us now. And the pangolin says, "Oh, I hope all people will stop buying those things." So hopefully there's a message there that can be understood by children and sort of related to in fairly simple terms. The story has a happy ending. The forest rangers release the pangolin, and the two animals make their way back through the forest to their home at the tallest tree. And then there's a conservation message at the end, with the pangolin thinking about what's happened, thinking about the forest rangers, and thinking that perhaps more people can help forest animals if they learn more about the rainforest and the animals in it. So there's an action for children to take at the end of the book as well. So there are more pages than that, but that gives a brief summary of what happens in the book. We have some activities planned to launch the book within Hong Kong. So we're hopefully having a small book launch and educational event in April within Hong Kong with Hong Kong Birdwatching Society, and planning to do some outreach and readings with schools around that time as well. There's also potential to add the book and some of the artwork from the book to educational and art displays within Hong Kong, possibly like the one that Chloe mentioned with AFCD as well. And there's potential to link in future with other projects through BirdLife International and other colleagues. Ideally, it would be great to translate the book into languages within the range of the species, particularly Indonesian and Malaysian languages. So that's something I would like to do sort of as the next step. I've also written a sequel and a prequel to the book. which introduce, so one that takes place before the events of the tallest tree and one which takes place after. And these introduce new species and new issues, especially habitat destruction and the illegal songbird trade. So those are not yet illustrated because I don't currently have the funds to do that. But one day that would be nice to follow up as well. But initially, very much focusing on maximising the impact of the tallest tree book. So if you're interested in purchasing the book, it's available currently from the Hong Kong Birdwatching Society website, and there's a link there to their e-shop, or you can just find the website and go to the e-shop. That's for the English version and bilingual in English and Cantonese version. There's also a version which will be available on eBay by the end of January. It's not quite there yet, but that's available through OBC eBay sales. So towards the end of the month, if you go to eBay and search for the book title, The Tallest Tree, then hopefully it should come up. Right. Excuse me. The price in Hong Kong is 96 Hong Kong dollars, plus postage and packaging, and within the UK is £8.99. A proportion of proceeds from sales of books will be donated to relevant conservation projects for conservation of the species and their habitats. And the OBC sales proceeds will go directly to the OBC Conservation Fund to be directed towards relevant projects for the species for helmeted hornbill. I'd like to thank quite a few people for helping with producing this book. I received quite a large donation from Anthony Mott towards printing costs for the book, so that was very gratefully received. Thanks very much to Vivian, who I think is on this call, for connecting me with Lillian, the illustrator, and just connecting lots of people together to help comment on the book and give me advice. Thanks to Lillian for doing these sort of amazing illustrations at reduced cost for a good cause. Robin Weir has helped me with, just supported with sort of creating the book, and his boss in particular for allowing him to store lots of the books in his office in Hong Kong. So yeah, very helpful. Obviously the Hong Kong Birdwatching Society, who are the publishers, and we're doing educational events and things with them as well. And lots of the colleagues who've commented and inputted into the book. So yeah, it's been quite a team effort, so thank you. And just to remind you of where you can buy the book, the Hong Kong Birdwatching Society e-shop for the Cantonese and English bilingual and the English version. And then eBay sales towards the end of the month, and search for the title, The Tallest Tree. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very
I think
much.
we're probably in quite good time.
It looks brilliant. Thanks for sharing with us your masterpiece, Jacqueline. On that note, could you also share the link to find out more and to purchase the book on the group chat? I think some of us, I'm sure there are people in the audience who are curious and want to know a bit more. So yeah, feel free to put that in the chat. Yeah, thanks for speaking about the book. I think the book is special in many rights. One being the fact that it's probably one of the few. I do read children's books myself for fun, and also to learn about what people talk about. And yours possibly could be the first ever on the conservation of the helmeted hornbill. I'm not aware. Maybe Anuj might be aware of other children's book about the helmeted hornbill, but this one is special. And also, I thought the illustration approach is quite unusual. I think the way Lillian has put together the illustrations is a combination of paintings and putting layers, as you have shown in your slide, giving that little bit of a three-dimensional effect. I think that makes it also quite special. And of course, the fact that you've got a mammal angle in it is not just about conservation of birds, but also a conservation of mammals. I think putting all these things together, I think everybody on this call should try to get a copy. Support your work. We look forward to your next book, and of course, we are very grateful for your support to the Oriental Bird Club through your proceeds on the sale of the book. I think we have time for
Thank you.
Q&A. In fact, I feel like we have at least a good 15 minutes as we have planned to take on some questions. And Anuj and myself will take turns to moderate these questions. For those of you who have questions and who have not posted, feel free to do so right now. You can just put it in the chat, and either Anuj or myself will read the questions out to the speakers. I think first and foremost,
Dingley, just a quick
yeah.
one.
Yeah.
Somewhere, if you can find time for the documentary, that'll be good as well.
Yeah, let's do that. How about let's do a couple of questions,
Yeah.
because I think there's a couple in the chat, and then we'll have like the video could be our grand finale. So I remember in the chat I saw there was a question from Bichu. Bichu, also a conservationist working on hornbills, and Bichu has a question on the trade of the helmeted hornbills casks. She says that she understands that there are imitations and replicas of helmeted hornbill casks going around in the markets of Asia. She's really keen to know if this is in fact increasing. What does the trade data show? What do the the conservation intel tells us? Maybe this is a question that should go to Chloe, working on the trade in casks and forensics. Yeah, Chloe.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for your question. That's a really good question, and one that we cannot be certain the answer of. Basically, like replicas and imitation require, I think, more than just photographic identification, because there are some good replicas out there. So we would actually have to get our hands on it to see if it was plastic or was it actually helmeted hornbill. But we have been using data in another way and looking at looking at different posts that are online, and the descriptions and the titles, and basically like working around at that and seeing if we can actually identify whether it was old or not. So there is some data that we're working on, and generally we've seen all products, regardless of what we thought, whether they were contemporary or antique, going down on the websites that we were looking at, which are quite comprehensive data sets. Obviously, like postings, listings, online data decreasing doesn't mean that trade is decreasing. It just means that website is not selling them anymore. So I haven't looked in the markets particularly for imitations at that point, but on online data it looks like it's going down, but then so is the antique side of it as well. Yeah, that's from what we've been doing.
All right, thanks. I can see the questions are coming in faster and more furiously. Two questions from members of the audience. The next one from John Clark on anti-poaching. In terms of anti-poaching measures, John would be keen to know whether it is because of work to strengthen actions against poaching that is behind the changes to access to the field center at the Dunham Valley, which is, of course, for many of us, one of the finest rainforests we have here in Southeast Asia. This is a question that possibly could be going to Anuj or Chloe. Do you know anything about the change in management of Dunham Valley Field Center?
Unfortunately, no. I'm looking at anyone from Sabah, if they could
Any colleagues
suggest
from
this. But more widely, I think this seems logical. Access might be restricted to make sure their sensitive species are protected, but it could be due to a whole bunch of other reasons. So
yeah, it could be safety as well, right? Safety.
yeah, we would get back to you, John.
Yeah,
on this
good
question.
Yeah, it could be a combination of safety and poaching. Part of helping to enforce or strengthen enforcement of patrols against poachers. There's a question coming from another member of the audience from Lai Wah Liu on the casks of the helmeted hornbill. What happened to these casks that are seized by authorities, whether in Hong Kong, China, or Southeast Asian countries? Maybe this question can go to any of the three speakers, Chloe, Anuj, and Jacqueline.
From Hong Kong side, AFCD keep their products in a vault, and they can donate them. They do donate them to academics, to schools. They don't sell them on or anything like that, as far as I know. But I also don't know. I did hear something about AFCD wanting to burn ivory, elephant ivory, at some point, but I haven't heard the same thing for hornbill casks yet.
Yeah, so Hong Kong Birdwatching Society are aware of some schools that have helmeted hornbill casks on display, which have been donated by AFCD. So we're focusing the educational activities with the book to those schools that have helmeted hornbill casks on display to kind of give some context to what's already there.
Anuj, maybe you want to provide a bit of comment on the Southeast Asian situation?
I think it's pretty much the same. In Indonesia as well, yeah, they are largely kept in stockpiles. There have been talks about burning them as well. And some of them fuel into research.
Another question. Thanks to all speakers for your thoughts on how different authorities across the region are managing these confiscated casks. We have yet another question on the illegal trade of helmeted hornbill parts, and this comes from Martin Lindop. I think this question goes more specifically to our colleagues in Hong Kong, to Chloe and to Jacqueline. The Hong Kong authorities, are they actively investigating the CITES case whenever they involve helmeted hornbills? Are they looking into these things diligently and more generally in relation to other protected species? What's your take on that?
Yeah. So there's a department that focus on CITES. So that's what AFCD do, and I think so this is like CITES Appendix 1, 2, and 3. Obviously, CITES Appendix 1 is the highest appendix, so they really focus on that, and they're in charge of sorting out all different species. Get lots of shark fin here, rosewood, elephant ivory, lots of things. They've got their work cut out for them.
Thanks. Thanks for that update on how the authorities in Hong Kong are looking into the matter. It's obviously a ever-changing situation, and of course, everybody has to be vigilant, keeping out for changes in the trade and all that sort of thing. Yeah, thanks for your comments, Chloe. There's a comment in the chat box from Bichu about a paper on helmeted hornbill casks, and so for those of us who are interested in the matter, feel free to keep an eye on the literature, which I suppose this paper will probably take some time to get out after peer review. Thanks for sharing with us, Bichu. I'm not sure if anybody has got questions on the book specifically, but I'm just going to throw a question from myself to Jacqueline, because I'm interested in the book as well. I'm interested in the art behind the book, and of course, Jacqueline, in the process of preparing this really attractive looking book, you would probably have done a bit of research on the kind of books out there on the conservation of Asian wildlife in the children's book literature. Jacqueline, are there a lot of books out there at this point on conservation of Asian species in the children books literature? And a secondary question, again, stemming from my own interest in the artwork behind your book, how much time did you and Lillian spend to produce all the illustrations? It looks like a very intricate bunch of work that you have done. I suppose that must have taken a lot of time. What's your experience?
Okay, so I did look at specifically Hornbill and pangolin books that are already on the market. There is a book not on helmeted hornbills, but on another species, possibly rhinoceros hornbill, that is I think published in Malaysia, but not very many on hornbills. There seem to be more on pangolins. I think pangolins have recently gained more public attention, and there have been a few children's stories books written now. So yeah, I think the helmeted hornbill certainly is unique though. In terms of the illustrations, yeah, the whole process I think probably took about 5 years, but that's
Wow.
because we took, it's not my main job. It's something that I was doing on the side, something that Lillian was doing sort of in her spare time as well. But each illustration certainly took a lot of effort and a lot of time put into it, and trying to make it true to the species as well and really representing them quite accurately. So there was a lot of research and sending photos to Lillian and things like that as well. So yeah, quite an effort.
Hmm. Yeah, I think the new generation of young people, they are lucky to have access to so many more children books on wildlife of where they live in. I think many of us in our 30s and 40s, we grew up in a different generation whereby many of us, we didn't have access to this this kind of children's book. Yeah, so I think we are really excited to see more of this. And what do you think, could you give us a little bit of a sneak preview of what your next major work would be? How much thought have you given to your next masterpiece, or maybe you may not want to tell us right now to keep the suspense?
Yeah, that's okay. I mentioned that I've drafted 2 different books which would feature the same characters as The Tallest Tree. But the first one takes place before The Tallest Tree, and it's more of an introduction to the rainforest and a very gentle introduction. It's maybe aimed at slightly younger children, but a gentle introduction to the illegal songbird trade. And then the sequel book has forest fire and forest destruction. It's a bit more exciting. So yeah, I would like to get those illustrated one day.
Sounds like there's some space for you to feature the straw-headed bobo, which is a species that Anuj and I work on.
Okay. I'll talk to you later.
Really, yeah, thanks for that little snippet to get us to keep our the suspense up. I think there's one more question. Maybe we have time for 1 or 2 more questions. Anuj, if you have your own questions, feel free to put it in the chat. I think Chloe may also have a maybe Chloe,
Yeah.
I'll come to you once with. Oh, Chloe, go for it. Yeah, go for it.
Sorry, it was just on the topic of the book.
Yeah.
So we're following that. I was just wondering, Jacqueline, do you how do you think the kids in Hong Kong are going to receive this if species they don't know about? And I'm just trying to think back to my childhood and like thinking about species I'd never seen or heard of and like how that affected me. But has there been a similar kind of book before that people have noticed like an increase in knowledge for school kids or through Hong Kong Watching Society or something? There's obviously cultural differences as well, and I think there's a question chat about the different audiences.
Okay. Oh, I haven't seen that question. Yeah, so Hong Kong Birdwatching Society have published children's books previously, which are based. The one I'm thinking of is about tree sparrows, which is a much more locally well-known species. So I think this book is a bit different in that regard. It's species that are relevant to Hong Kong. I mean, Chinese pangolins are found in Hong Kong, but still very little known within the area. But I think part of the book is about raising that awareness as well, and hopefully in quite an engaging way. I'm just reading the question in the chat. When the book being planned to be, does it?
I think there's a question from Olivia Rondonu.
Oh yes.
Yeah, on the translation of the book to Bahasa Indonesia, Malaysia. I think she's keen to know who would the target audience be for these 2 countries, which are important range states for the Hornbill.
Yeah. So the idea is not being really discussed very much yet, but would be to link up with projects within those countries and maybe target it to areas where there's already some education around the species and sort of add it as an educational tool to those projects.
Well, fingers crossed. And I think you, in talking about translations, we also touch on the point about how we can make the material, the stories accessible to a broad audience across the region. And of course, not there are lots of people out there who read in Malay and Indonesian, and of course, I think with the book in these languages, it will go even further. Anuj, I'm not sure if you have a questions yourself. Feel free to jump on board. I think we can have a more casual discussion.
Well,
Among
I just wanted to make one
yeah,
point,
yeah, yeah.
which I didn't get a chance to make earlier. While we're talking about helmeted hornbills, charismatic bird species, its conservation is synonymous with conserving the rainforest, Southeast Asia, and therefore, my personal hope is that one day we can work more closely, within the conservation community. If we can rally together the tiger conservationists, the elephant conservationists, the orangutan conservationists, so that we can double, triple, quadruple our efforts and help each other, that'll be brilliant.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Yeah, I think for those of us who are working in conservation, there's a lot of different conversations involving different groups of conservationists, and sometimes maybe bringing that synergy together could, help conservation of species. Yeah. I think we're close to the end of the webinar, and I think we've earlier talked about actually showing the audience the documentary that Chloe has earlier talked about. So maybe on that note, I should pass the floor back to Chloe. Thanks to everybody for putting out these questions. I think they were all very important questions to get us thinking about how we can help the Hornbill, and of course, how we can get the message on the Hornbill to an even wider audience, including non-English speaking audiences. I think Chloe, feel free to take over, share with us the documentary. And I'm sure many of us, including myself, are keen to see the story that you have developed there. Yeah, over to you.
Oh, yeah, thanks. So yeah, like I said, it's just a short documentary, but we created this to show the government. We've done it with Chinese subtitles, and we've got a version for them that we didn't want to put out too much. So there's like two different versions, basically. So this one is the short version, so no worries about that. Here, and yeah. Can you see a black screen, a black box? Yes. Okay. Let me know if you can hear it. I'll just play it now then. Found across some of the world's oldest primary rainforests, the helmeted hornbill built her nest. Preparing for 6 long nesting months ahead, the female helmeted hornbill will give birth to her only chick in 2 years. Fully devoted to motherhood, she will wall herself into the nest, shed her feathers, and become completely reliant on her mate for the duration of the nesting period. This rare and majestic species of bird plays a very important part in both natural and cultural ecosystems across Southeast Asia.
The helmeted hornbill is vital for the rainforest because it's a fig specialist. Fig trees are an important food source for all kinds of wildlife, such as orangutans, gibbons, and turungs. Helmeted hornbills, they consume fig fruits, and the seeds pass through their body. And because they cover vast areas, they carry the seeds far and wide from the parent tree, and they spread the seeds. But nowadays, the helmeted hornbill are extremely rare, and you can only find them deep within the rainforest. They are protected in every country they reside in, and any international trade concerning this species is banned.
The helmeted hornbill is now listed on the IUCN as critically endangered and is included under CITES Appendix 1. The species is declining due to the illegal hunting for their cast, a structure that protrudes above the beak and is used by the bird as a defensive weapon.
We're running out of time. If the killing continues, the helmeted hornbill is going to go extinct.
Researchers in the IUCN Helmeted Hornbill Working Group are investigating the trade in hornbill casque to help law enforcement agencies combat it.
The illegal trade has far exceeded the legal trade in helmeted hornbill. Since 2011, there have been more than 6,000 helmeted hornbill casques and products seized globally, with both of these happening in China and along the border of Hong Kong and mainland China.
However, it is sometimes difficult to tell which species a casque or carving seized by law enforcement is from, and this can prevent the appropriate criminal charges being brought to court. This is where wildlife forensics comes in.
Wildlife forensics provides scientific evidence that can be used in court cases to help ensure successful prosecutions of wildlife crimes. So say, for example, the government seizes some animal products that are maybe come from a protected species. Scientists can use these forensic techniques to identify species, potentially to identify geographic origin of these species, and all of this information can help to prosecute these crimes. So here at the Conservation Forensics Lab at Hong Kong U, we have developed a suite of genetic tools specifically for helmeted hornbills to help in these court cases. So by taking a small piece of DNA from the casque, we can identify with almost 100% certainty that this is a helmeted hornbill casque, and this evidence can be used in court to help with the prosecutions. These tools have been designed and validated to provide robust evidence for use in court. In addition to the species ID, we can also use genetic evidence to identify the geographic location of some of these casques. And this information can help when working with teams in Malaysia and other countries to put together these transnational trade routes.
The DNA analysis is extremely useful for the prosecutors and the judges because it allows them to be certain that the species that they are looking at is the species that is being alleged, so that the crime can be proved and that justice can be served.
However, only with collaboration between researchers, forensic scientists, and law enforcement can knowledge on certain species be shared, and those who commit wildlife crimes can be brought to justice.
The Helmeted Hornbill Working Group is conducting online and physical market surveys to track and monitor the trade and demand in Hong Kong. This information will then be given to law enforcement for appropriate actions.
What is critically important for the success of this work is that we work with partners in range states of this species. So we're working with collaborators in Malaysia, Thailand, and Indonesia to ensure that the data that we're producing is leading towards effective conservation of this species.
We need the help of everyone along the trade route, field researchers, forensic scientists, and law enforcement to stop this illegal trade. Unless we act now, the helmeted hornbill will go extinct in just a few years' time.
Thank you. That was a fantastic video. Do you want to give us any final words on the video, Chloe?
Yeah, so with the funding that OBC gave us, we were able to hire some people who did the filming for us. So we had Resh Productions from Hong Kong side and Jits Pics, so Gaia, who Ravinder Kaur and Sanjit work for. They also do some wildlife photography as well. So they filmed all the stuff over in Malaysia. And we had Resh Productions doing a lot of work over in Hong Kong. Yeah, the team, including like Hong Kong Birdwatching Society and HKU, were generally the people who we were interviewing. And the lab was in the University of Hong Kong as well. So that's where a lot of the forensic work was. So although I'm at City University now, I did my work over there before and during this project. Yeah, so when we showed that to the government, they really enjoyed it actually, which is great. That's the idea. And on that QR code, we should find a way of sharing the information, Dingley, at some point. But you can, other people can also download it and share it. I've been asked by a few other people for use in different countries already. So yeah, feel free to use it.
Yeah, possibly we could put it on the OBC for social media pages, and then people who come by can access the information that you have on those links. Yeah. Cool. Thank you very much. Well, I think it's getting a bit late in the day here in Asia, and possibly dinner time for many of us here. I think we've all gone through a really interesting webinar in your morning, your afternoon, depending on where in the world you are. We have learned about the plight of the helmeted hornbill through 3 presentations. More importantly, we have also seen how the story and the threats that the helmeted hornbill and another highly threatened species, the Sunda pangolin, can be communicated to a broad range of audiences, as shown in the work by Jacqueline Weir. I think it's an insightful webinar for me, as much as I hope it will be for you. And I think once before we call it an evening, I would like to once more thank my colleagues Jacqueline, Anuj, and Chloe for making time to join us on this webinar to share their conservation work on the helmeted hornbill amongst other species, and also show us how we can use different tools in communications and in other disciplines to advance conservation. Thank you once more for sharing your time with us. For those of you out there who are keen to learn more about the Oriental Bird Club and the conservation work that we do in the region, I have just put the link in the chat box. Join us as a member, support our conservation work, and you have seen from today's webinar some of the work that we support directly on the ground. I think that is all from us tonight. Thank you once more, and have a great evening, great afternoon, wherever you are. Goodbye, and see you again at the next webinar. Thanks.
Bye. Thank you, Dingley.
Thank you.
Indeed.
I think it went very well.
Yeah, it did.
I'm happy everyone kept the time.
Yeah, I think we did good. Yeah, it was we had a few we had more questions than I anticipated, so we took a bit longer with that. Yeah, and we had our little talk show kind of approach to chatting about the hornbills and all that. Yeah. Well, I know it's getting late in your part of the world. Thanks. Anuj, I'm just going to save the recording on my computer, so don't worry about
Okay.
it. I think it will automatically save the moment I close the webinar.
I put it in the cloud, so let's see where it
Oh,
goes.
okay. Oh, even better. Yeah, even better. Yeah, because usually what I tend to do is that I'll stay behind for another 20 minutes to make sure that the whole thing gets downloaded. So maybe I don't have to worry about that this time around.
You don't, it'll just go.
Yep.
Perfect.
Well, thanks. Well done, everybody. I think it became a more substantive webinar. It became a mini conference of sorts.
Yeah,
Yeah.
isn't it? It was really nice to see like all the different ways that people are working on the.
Yeah.
I think that's
Hey,
what.
before we go, let's take a group photo.
Okay.
We should.
Make sure we are all smiling. All right, 1, 2, and 3.
All right. Yeah, I'm in the office, by the way. Yeah, it's nice and quiet here.
Nice. I hope you have a good rest
Not
of your
quite.
day.
Sorry.
I said I hope you have a good rest of your day, because it's still
Yeah,
daytime.
thank you. Still morning for me. I was just
Yeah.
going to say not quite 120 people turned up, but still some.
I think there's a bit of turnover. I think the number was something like 60, which is kind of expected, because people come and go, and some people were on 2 sign-in names. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, still pretty good.
Yeah,
I'm glad. Yeah, I think in the post-pandemic era, it's usually a little more challenging to bring in people, because we can have in-person events these days. Yeah, so maybe one day we'll have an actual OBC seminar somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That'd be good. We should.
Yeah. Well, thanks for making
Alright.
time.
Jacqueline,
I better let you
thank
go.
you.
We've got busy schedules. I'm going to head out as well to the pub.
Jackie,
Thanks so much.
I want to talk to you about using some of your books in an art exhibition that we're holding in Hong Kong.
Vivian mentioned something about that, so yeah, sure.
Okay, just to get you.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
know.
Take care,
Okay, have a
everybody.
good time in the
Yeah.
pub.
Yeah. See you soon. Take care and
See
have
you
a great
soon.
weekend.
Bye.
Yep.
Take
Cheers.
care.
Bye bye.